I don't know if any of you have kids, but if you do, you should get a book. It's called Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein. It's kind of this fun little thing, and he writes it for kids, and yet there's messages in it for adults. And so this is one that I like. It's called No Difference. It says, small as a peanut, big as a giant, we're all the same size when you turn out the light. Rich as a sultan, poor as a mite, we're all worth the same when you turn out the light. Red, black, or orange, yellow, or white, we all look the same when we turn off the light. So maybe the way to make everything right is for God just to reach out and turn off the light. I just like that thought that we are all the same, and that we just need that. Okay, today we start what section? Investing. So realize my background is not in personal finance. My background is the investing side. I learned the personal finance stuff through hard knocks and making mistakes. So hopefully you won't make the mistakes that I made. But it's really exciting to be able to teach this section. Let's kind of go through what we're going to be doing today. Everyone will be putting together an investment plan. This is a plan on how you will invest over your lifetime. It includes your risk tolerance. It includes expected returns. It includes all of these things here. Very similar to what a lawyer do. I used to have people kind of put their plan together, and then I realized, you know what, you really need a template to follow. And so that template is Learning Tool 5A, and then 5B is just some instructions on how to do it. But if you will put together a plan of how you will invest, it will make a difference. I saw a study, and I'll share with that just in a minute. Those people who planned their investments when they retired had 3 times more than the people who failed to plan. So I think that's important. So we call that an investment plan. In finance terminology, it's called an investment policy statement. So in my asset management class, one of the first things we did was to put together an investment policy statement that would state what we do, what we won't do, what we'll invest in, what we won't invest in, how we'll report, and all of these things. So that template will include what are your risk and return objectives. So each of you are going to have to come up with those. What are your investment guidelines and constraints? How will you invest? What will you invest in? What won't you invest in? What is your investment policy? And then when will you evaluate, modify, and communicate your results? And also, if you have any investments now, which for most of you will probably not, it will include your current investments and allocations. So then your action plan, that's really the most important thing, because once you leave in 5 days, 5 class periods after this, I want you to know once you walk out the door on the 5th day, actually the 6th day after our speaker, I want you to know what you're going to invest in, first dollar you get after you graduate from school, where's it going to go, what are the funds you'll invest in, and what is your schedule for investing going forward. So your action plan, what are your proposed investments and allocations? And that you'll include copies from a financial source. I recommend Morningstar. You're going to have a minimum of 4 financial assets. Again, a minimum of 4 asset classes. And we're going to have different areas: emergency fund or funds, your core financial assets, your diversification assets, and opportunistic assets. And truthfully, you don't have to be in opportunistic assets at all. And then you'll also include Learning Tool, the expected return simulation, in your investment process worksheet. Okay, that's a lot. But that's kind of what we'll be putting together. And I think it's important that we understand this so we don't worry about what happens. I used to invest in emerging markets, and I woke up one morning and there was a coup in the Philippines. About 6 months later, I went to the Philippines, and I could still see the bullet holes in the hotel where I stayed. I woke up another morning, and we had 50 million in Malaysia, and it was stuck there. We couldn't get it out. So I prefer to build what I call a sleep well portfolio. I've had enough mornings where I wake up and something really weird's happened. And so I build a portfolio that, when I go to bed at night, I don't worry about what's going on. And I think we can all do that, because most of us, our jobs are not going to be selecting stocks and building portfolios and managing money for others. Our main stocks are going to be accounting or finance or statistics or econ or real estate. And so what we want to do is we want to build a portfolio that we can sleep well at night. So what I've done is we've got basically 10 different sections on this. And what I'm doing is each day I'll actually give you the assignments that I'd like you to do. And so by the time we get to end of day 6, you should be able to put it all together. And it shouldn't be a pain to put together. It shouldn't be hard. So before you invest, that's today what we're going to talk about. If I can get the technology. So I'd like you to copy Teaching Tool 5A. Copy it onto another file. I'd like to add your information, your name. If you're married, your spouse's name. Your ages, and we'll actually talk about why the ages are important. I'd like you to take a risk tolerance test. We'll actually do that in class today because I'd like to help you as you put this together. What we're going to do is we're going to determine what type of investor you are. Are you conservative or very conservative? Are you moderate? Are you aggressive or very aggressive? Realize these are kind of arbitrary labels, but I think it can help us to understand. And I'd like you to develop your preliminary asset allocation. What are you going to have in stocks? What are you going to have in bonds and cash? And we'll actually do that from our risk tolerance test. On the bond section, I'd like you to open Learning Tool 23 and just look at the volatility. So what I've done is I've given you 1 year, 5, 10, 25, 50, 75, 85, and 90-year returns. So we calculated geometric returns. In fact, I just got the data last night, so I can calculate it for 2016. But what are those returns? How volatile it is? And we'll look at standard deviation as a measure of volatility. I'd like you to open this one here, labeled returns. Look at the returns for bonds versus other asset classes. Bonds are a lot less risky, but the returns are less, so I'd like you to compare those. And think about what percentage of your portfolio should be in bonds. Okay, so that's your assignment for today before you come on Wednesday. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we teach investments. I teach it a little bit differently from most classes. Most people, what they'll do is they'll take a financial assets approach. They'll talk about stocks and bonds. They'll talk about other things, other financial assets. What's the problem with this approach? It changes. How long have we had ETFs? Everyone know what an exchange-traded fund is? An exchange-traded fund is an index fund that trades throughout the day like a stock. So how long have we had ETFs? 8 years. How about index funds? How long have we had index funds? 20 years. How long have we had mutual funds? Yeah, so the point here is these assets, we may have different assets tomorrow than we do today. And so if we take an assets approach, when assets change, it makes it tough. I take a principles-based approach. So, because principles won't change. In fact, if we can go back and see why most people have underperformed, you can actually go back to the principles and find out which principles they violated. So let's talk about what we're going to do. I want you to be patient with me. Don't expect to be picking stocks or picking mutual funds the first day. So here's kind of what we'd like to do. Today we're going to talk about principles and before you invest. Okay, let's build the foundation. Are there certain things we should do before we start investing? Next day what we'll do is we will create your investment plan. We will take that Learning Tool 5 and we'll actually go through it line by line and paragraph by paragraph. Kind of help you to see why it's important. Why did we add these sections here? What problems will it help us to alleviate? Then we'll talk about building your portfolio. Is there logic behind building a portfolio? I would venture to say that in all of your finance classes, well, here, question. In any of your finance classes that they taught you how to build a portfolio? They may tell you, okay, make sure you're sharp ratio and make sure you get an efficient frontier. But did they tell you about how to build it? We're going to teach you how to build that portfolio. Then what we're going to do is, once you've built the portfolio, you know what it looks like, then we'll talk about how do you select financial assets. What makes a better asset than another? We're in the process in the modeling and valuation class. Travis, I'm going to pick on you not just because you yawn, but because you're in my other class. is it easy to find the dog stocks? The poor performing ones?
Yeah, there's tons and tons and
There's tons and tons. How hard is it to find the good ones?
We haven't found one yet.
It's difficult. And it's the same way with mutual funds. It's easy to find the dogs because they violate certain principles. It's hard to find the good ones. And so we'll spend time on that. And then our last day, we'll spend time on portfolio reporting and rebalancing because that's such an important part. And finally, we'll have a speaker come and we'll summarize there. So be patient with me as I work through this framework. Realize we're not going to jump into selecting financial assets right off. We're going to build a foundation, and then we'll continue building on that. Now, that will be the last part. Okay, questions kind of on our framework? Okay. You know, when it comes to, well, let's start with some definitions. Someone want to define, you know, as you went through the reading, what definitions were hard to understand? So someone tell me what a mutual fund is. Define it. So a mutual fund is a group of people that get together and they pool their assets together, and then they hire someone to invest those assets on a certain asset class for them. So it's professional management in a specific asset class. So my career has been with 2 asset management firms, and the last one was with Montgomery Asset Management, and we ran dozen funds for both retail and institutional clients. So I was a mutual fund manager. What is an index fund? People would pay me, and the asset class I worked in was called emerging markets. So I was in Asia, I was in Latin America, I was in the Middle East and Africa. So that's where I spent most of my time. In fact, I was mainly responsible for Asia and a little bit of the Middle East. Okay, how about an index fund? So when I was managing a mutual fund, I could decide what to buy and sell. They paid me well, and they sent me on nice airplanes and stayed in nice hotels to go buy and sell stocks. An index fund, do you pay an expensive analyst to go and travel these places? And the answer is no. What they do is they follow a specific index, and generally they'll buy and sell stocks within that index, and their goal is to match the performance of that index. So an index fund that follows the S&P will match the performance of the S&P generally. What are asset classes? It's important that we understand that.
Like certain sectors of the economy.
Right.
Real estate or
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals.
So it's securities. It's a certain class of security that has similar characteristics. So equities would be an asset class. Bonds would be an asset class. You can even go more in depth. Small cap stocks is an asset class. Real estate, you could have sectors asset class. So real estate or consumer disposable. But those asset classes are important. What do you think adds more value? Stock picking individual stocks, or picking the right asset classes? Thoughts? Where do you think most of the value has been added? Yeah, picking the asset classes. And there's lots of different research there. Any other definitions as you went through the reading that caused some concern that we didn't quite understand? Okay. So we understand the terminology, because we'll be using that terminology today quite a bit. Okay. Quick question. What should you do before you begin investing? Set your goals. Is it important to understand your goals? Yeah. Other things. Yeah, know your risk tolerance. Know where you want to risk, where you want to invest. How about most of you guys right now? Should you guys be investing?
Depends on your situation.
Now, I teach an asset management and the modeling and valuation class, and I like the students just to have a little tiny bit of money in the stock market, just so they can learn from their mistakes and the challenges there. But for most people, you know, right now, what are you doing? You're investing yourself. That's the important thing. What you're doing there. Let me just share some thoughts. Some people think, oh, you should be investing right now, but really we should be thinking through the process. Is there a priority to paying your bills? Are some bills more important than others? How about the certain things you should never do without? I got a kick because on Monday we talked about auto insurance. And after class, my wife called me up and she says, you know what, I was trying to get back home and I slid into a curb. And so I drove into this person's driveway. This was up at Iroquois and Navajo. This other person came down and slid right into my car. So my wife was in a wreck on it. It didn't hurt our car too much, but you know, it's just interesting. But are there certain things you should never do without? Are there other bills more important than investing? High interest rate items, credit cards, consumer invest. And is there a purpose to investing? You know what, I think if we'll answer these questions, we'll make much better decisions. So I put this together. Again, it's just a learning tool. I use the hourglass. The hourglass has been used in teaching for hundreds of years, but here's how I build it. Number one, are your priorities in order, or are you square with the Lord? You know, we've got to be careful we're not investing with other people's money. Number two, do you have adequate auto, health, and life insurance? I would be really sad if we didn't have auto insurance right now. Actually, the other driver admitted that they made that they had made a mistake, and my wife just felt really bad. It was a mom, she with 3 kids in the car, and they were taking him to the doctors. But do you have adequate auto, health, and life insurance? Had a cousin, 26, 1 child, and her husband passed away. You know, are the things that are more important. Number 3, are you out of high interest rate credit card and consumer debt? And I'm amazed at people, I think I got to invest. And, you know, I'm paying 24% on my credit card, and I'm making 8% in the market. You know, we've got to use wisdom in what we do. And the last one, have you written down your personal goals? Do you live on a budget, and do you have a well-written investment plan? You know, as Byron talked about there, you know, you've got to understand. If you can answer these questions, then you're ready to invest. Randy.
I never got a chance to ask, as a student, like, when and how much life insurance do I need to have?
Okay, are you married?
Yeah, just got married.
Okay. Does your wife have her education?
She's in school as well.
Okay. Any kids?
Nope.
Okay. So, what do you think? What would you want to do to if you wanted to take care, fulfill your responsibility as a father, what do you think is important for you?
To make sure she's okay.
Make sure she's okay and taken care of. How would you like that to be?
What do you mean?
You know, what would that entail? Would you want to make sure that if you passed away, she'd have sufficient to get her education, to continue to go on, things like that?
Definitely.
Okay. So that's a good start. And I think those, that Learning Tool 29, calculating life insurance needs, that can help things out. Jalen.
I was just going to ask about that learning tool. So I was looking at how to fill out our personal financial plan, and I just don't get how to use that. Is there a time that we could go over all those things?
So really all that tool is there any one right way to calculate your insurance needs? So how many different ways do we have on that summary? Like 6 different ways or 7 different ways to calculate. You know, there's DIME, there's the needs approach, there's the multiples approach. There's one my wife came up with. You know, there's just lots of different ways, and you come up with your own. And my assumption is if you do it 7 different ways, somewhere around there is probably a good way to do it. And so what it's going to do is it just wants to get you to think through the issues. And if you're single and you're not married, you have much need for life insurance? Probably not. However, if you're married and you have kids, the answer is you probably should. Okay. But if anyone, like I said, I'm not a high demand professor, come by during office hours, and I'd love to just kind of sit down and we'll work on it. I actually had someone come in and said we could clean up this a little bit because some of the same information you put on different tabs, but we'll work on that. What is this process here? What does it cause you to do? If you use the top of the hourglass, what does it cause you to do? Warren?
I guess it calls you like be prepared and be ready.
Be prepared and be ready. But as a teaching tool, what does it help us to do?
Find a lot of things that aren't as important.
Yeah, final. So it causes you to prioritize. What's our first priority? Square with the Lord. What's our second priority? Our family. What's our final priority? Personal responsibility. So I like this. It's priorities based. And that's really important as we put things together. How do you think most investors have done? So we're talking about investing. What do you guys have? Most investors beat the market. They've done a lot better than the benchmarks. So their portfolios are really high and they're really ready for retirement and they're not worried a bit. What percent of people do you think are actually in that boat? Very small. So ideally, if we're going to be putting our investment plan together, we really should actually try to understand how most investors have done. And maybe what we'll do is let's just kind of look at, from a performance point of view, how have they done versus a benchmark? So when we talk about a benchmark, what are we talking about? Yeah, the market. So if you had a benchmark for large cap stocks, large capitalization stocks, which is a measure of size, what would that benchmark be? Yeah, so the S&P 500. How about for small capitalization stocks? Probably the Russell. So a benchmark is a way of determining how well you've done. When we talked about buying a home and getting a loan, what was the benchmark we used? You wanted to minimize your what? Effective interest rate. And here, when we talk about benchmark, we want to see how did we do versus our benchmark or a comparable portfolio similar to what we would want. So what do you guys think? Have most people outperformed their benchmarks? So let me tell you a little bit about this group here. This is called Dalbar. Every year they do a quantitative analysis of equity behavior. So what they do is they go to a number of brokerage houses. They've got permission. They go in and they divide that out by asset classes. And it's not just what people say they did, it's their actual number. So from 1990 to 2009, the investor returns, and I don't remember how many thousand investor it was, but it's a very good sample. We're 3.2%. The benchmark was up 8.2, and so people underperform by 500 basis points. That's not 500 basis points over that time period. That's 500 basis points a year. Well, people say, well, maybe that was bad. So the data hasn't come out for 2017 yet. But 2016, from 1996 to 2015, the average investor was up 4.7%. The benchmark was up 8.2%. They underperformed by 3.5%. Chad?
So, and I don't know much about the stock market, but so we're saying if they would have invested in an index
Fund, they would have gotten this. They would have gotten this amount.
That's what their returns would have been.
Would have been. But why don't people invest in index funds? I think you know better. Warren?
So are those like active? Is that like what would be like an investor return? Would that be like picking your own stocks, or is that like?
This is just the actual return of the actual portfolios.
So that's like a mutual fund portfolio.
Well, this would be mutual funds. This would be stocks. This would be bonds, and all the things they went in.
So like you're paying somebody to invest your money, and they're doing worse than the market itself.
So why are we paying? It's interesting. Article on Mondays. Buffett keeps his batting average. It says Buffett himself recommends that investors use low-cost index funds rather than placing their money with active managers that charge higher fees. More than $100 billion, he said in his letter, has been wasted on bad investment advice over the decade. Again, Monday's Wall Street Journal. Well, maybe it's just. Go ahead.
I don't know much about the stock
Aaron, and
market
then
either, but
Tanner.
index funds, aren't there large cap, mid cap, and small cap? Are those different returns?
Yeah, this is just index. This is just for large cap right here.
Large cap, okay.
Okay, Tanner.
I was just curious because, like, if you have 401k, your 401k is probably putting a lot of money, like mutual funds and stuff like that. Would be
you don't really have much control yet.
You don't have much of a choice, but generally your 401k managers have the cost, they've reduced the cost in those funds.
There's less cost.
Yeah. So what about bond investors? Have bond investors done better? Maybe it's just equity investors that are having problems. Bond investors, what do we find? Investor returns 0.5, 5.3, minus 4.8. Again, that's not 4.8% over 20 years. That's 4.8% a year. That's 480 basis points. Well, maybe you're saying, well, what about people, those asset allocators who decide when the market's low, they'll go into the market, and when the high, they'll sell out. How about people who do that asset allocation? How have they done? Have they been able to add value? No. So the question is, if most people who have underperformed the benchmarks what are we going to do differently so we don't end up like them? I like what Einstein said. He says it's the height of insanity to do the same thing and get a different result. So what we have to do is we have to do something different. Oren.
So I just have a question. Looking at these numbers, why would anybody choose to invest, use an investor to invest? Because I mean, obviously they're doing worse, and I mean at that point, don't people get fired and lose their jobs? And
unless people aren't following, people aren't
Just don't
monitoring
care.
performance.
they just don't
Yeah.
pay attention.
And so if we want to do this, we could just buy an index fund and get that return. What was the Snoopy comic? Or was it Dilbert? Is it something about I'm starting an index fund for people who aren't smart enough to know how to, or I'm starting a fund for people who aren't smart enough to know how to buy an index fund? I thought that was funny. So if, Joseph Smith said, I teach them correct principles and they govern themselves. What should those correct principles be so that we won't make the mistakes that many other people make? What should those principles be?
What would be like keep your pride in check?
Yeah, keep your pride in check. I got a kick out of this article here. It says, your husband is not isn't as good as he thinks he is. But what I'd like to do is let's spend some time. Let's divide into our groups. And I'd like to just think about what are the principles of investing that if we would follow, we would not get the returns that we would not have the challenges that everybody else or that many other people do. So do we understand that? And what we want to do is we want to come up with those principles of successful in. And just so you don't think I'm making these up too, yesterday I got my Charles Schwab book, and one of the key articles, 7 investing principles, fundamentals you need for investing success. So let's see if we can come up with, and I've got 10 in the PowerPoints and in the book. Are those the right 10? I don't know, but they're probably a good one. They're probably a good start. And just because, you know what, are those the only 10? No, of course not. So why don't we spend a few minutes and let's come up with, divide into groups. Let's see if we can come up 2 or 3 principles that we all could use to help us to be wiser investors. Okay. This is from Elder Oaks, who said this. What he says, you know what, we can't simplest principle can difficult to apply. He says we must rely on teaching correct principles with each member should personally apply to govern his or her circumstances. So what are those correct principles? Go ahead, sorry. Let's start with some sides here. Colin, what did your group come up with? What's one of the principles? Pardon me? Okay. So basically, understand risk. Is there a lot of risk out there? And do you want to invest at a risk level you're comfortable with? Yeah? Okay, Jeff, what did your group come up with? One of the principles.
So we talked about how you shouldn't
try and beat the market.
Yeah. Don't try either to beat. Don't try to beat the market. Or try to time the market. You know, I did professionally manage my team. Our high point, we were managing about 3.2 billion in emerging markets. So it's not huge, but it was still a good size. And I didn't know anyone who could time the market effectively. Other ones.
We said
Ted.
to make sure you have a diverse portfolio.
Yeah. You know what? Diversified portfolio, that's really your main defense against risk on this.
Not to be greedy and not to treat it as gambling.
Not to be greedy, what was the second part?
And not to treat it as gambling.
Yeah, it's not gambling. Other principles.
Know your timeline
Aaron.
and money.
Yeah. Know when you're going to need the money because you'll invest differently depending on your different buckets. Or,
I have a question regarding that one.
okay?
So like with our situation as students in school, like I feel like a lot of us are going to want to buy a home before we start
Okay.
making like major investments.
Okay.
So where do we, obviously you don't want to lose your principal you're putting away.
Mhm.
So how do we, is it just like a risk tolerance issue, like how willing we are to lose our money versus?
So here's a question. Let's say you graduate and 2 years later you're going to buy a home. Are you going to want to put any of that money that you're saving for the down payment in your home? Of course not. You don't want to put it at risk. If it's 5 years, might you want to put some? Yeah, you might put 20% of that.
Okay.
If it's 7 years, you might put 30% of that in the market. But you got to be wise in what you do. A lot of it's understanding yourself. In fact, a lot of it's understanding your goals. Tanner.
Going along with like knowing you need the money, like
Uh-huh.
it's also important to be patient because you don't want to obsess over the market.
Yeah. You know, and that's what I like to do. Invest long term. I put something in the market and I don't expect to take it out for 40 years. Even now I put it in, I don't expect to take it out for 40 years and I'll be 102.
But just to go along with that, choosing something that'll be low time, you want to spend a lot of time worrying about it or managing it.
Okay.
It could be a low time commitment.
And I like this. You know, I invest in these index funds, and I probably have 70% of my portfolio in index funds. Of course, I know for active managers that's not a good thing to say. But why do I like that? And it's because if I have a mutual fund that has 10 stocks in it, how much do I have to know about all 10 of those stocks? Quite a bit. How about if I have a mutual fund that has 7,000 stocks in, and the largest mutual fund makes up less than 1% of it? Yes. So I really have, you know, we talk about priorities based. I like this because I can spend time on the really important priorities. Like yesterday afternoon, went out with my wife. It was the last ski day. So she has a BYU ski class, and so I went out with her, and they took us down these things. They're trying to teach us how do we do moguls, and for an old guy who's not very good shape, it was tough. And then my daughter had a Provo High basketball dinner and awards dinner, so I went to that, and then after that, my ward had a genealogy night, and then I went to that. So I'm really spending a lot of time on my portfolio, too, between my wife and my kids and my church calling. But that's the way I like it. And you know what? I don't worry about, well, what's Trump going to talk about today and what's he going to make the stock market do tomorrow, because I have a much longer term. You know, again, investing long term. Any other ones?
Fees,
Yeah.
taxes.
Invest low cost, tax efficient. Because it's not what you make, it's what you make after taxes and fees that makes you wealthy. Any other ones?
Yeah, whichever
Dan.
investment route that you're deciding to go, be educated in that. I feel oftentimes people will hear something or they'll get a pitch from someone about something and they'll think, oh, that sounds great. Sure, let's do it, without doing it.
Be careful who you get your information from, too. You know, anytime there's I hear a church calling and money in the same thing, I run. I don't like the direction this is going. Either we stop the conversation or I'm leaving. And you know what? After the first time they get the hint, at least most of the time they get the hint. Okay. So would you guys like to see what Charles Schwab says about what their principles are? And then we'll kind of run through these. Number 1, establish a financial plan based on your goals. And then here's that little chart. Non-planners, successful planners had 3 times average total net worth more than the non-planners. Number 2, start saving and investing today. Number 3, build a diversified portfolio based on your tolerance for risk. Anyone here know what your risk tolerance is? We're going to do that in just a minute. Number 4, minimize fees and taxes. That also requires turnover. Number 5, build in protection against significant losses, which is to do a diversified portfolio. 6, rebalance your portfolio regularly, which is part of our plan. Number 7 is ignore the noise. So let's start. Let's just kind of go through some slides that I think are kind of fun. Okay. Principle number 1. Know yourself. Who do you think trades more? Well, know yourself. Know your goals, your budget. Know your ability to tolerate risk. Invest accordingly. I'd like, again, that sleep well portfolio for most of us is probably a good idea. Some of us, there's a couple of people who are kind of high risk, but it's really important. Watch over confidence. Shelby.
What are some of your goals what would be some of your goals when you're starting out investing with that money if it's something that we don't need?
Yeah. So what happens is I can't control what the market will do, but I can control how much I put in. I can control how long I keep it there. I can control my risk tolerance by my asset by what I choose. So my goals are on the things that I can control rather than on the things I can't control. And right now, you guys are in school now. You're investing in yourself. That's the best investment you can make. Don't worry about investing basically in the market until after you get out, until after you get things a little bit more stable. Who do you think trades more, men or women? Who do you think has the higher return? Women. So what this article was is they went into this brokerage house, they got permission, they divided by men and women, they divided before and afterwards. So men trade 45% more, their returns were 2.7 less. Who thinks trade more, single men or single women? And who has the higher return? Yeah. What do you think? Here's a question. The fact that you can go onto your computer and push a button and that sends it to the stock market, does that improve your ability to get return? So what they found out is online trading, do you think that helps or hurts most investors? It actually hurts. So before they beat it by 1.9%, underperformed by 3.6%. So that's almost 6% difference. So I like the thing from Pogo. We have seen the enemy and he is who? He is us. We're our biggest ones. Understand risk. Lots of risk out there. What we're going to do is we want to take a risk tolerance test. So what I would like you to do is, this is Learning Tool 16. We're going to do this in class. What you need to do is we want you to figure out what kind of an investor you are. So a risk tolerance test will do 2 things. Number 1, it'll help us to understand what type of investor we are. And number 2, it will help us to see what our allocation should be between stocks and bonds. And stocks and bonds and cash. So I'd like you to get a piece of paper out. You're going to have to do it for your investment plan. You might as well do it now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you 8 questions. And then by the way you answer these questions, we should be able to figure out, at least to a degree, what kind of an investor you are. Okay? Realize risk tolerance tests. Realize risk tolerance tests are somewhat arbitrary. I used to do these at my company to try to help people to decide which of our funds to invest in. My purpose on doing this one here, so there kind of was an ulterior motive. Here, my only purpose is really just to help you to understand what kind of an investor you are. Oren.
Is this something like you should do if you're married, you should do with your spouse?
I do it with your spouse too. So, in fact, in mine, I'm an aggressive investor. My wife was a conservative investor, and we compromised on a moderate. So, and actually, that's been a good decision for you. In fact, you want to know what the best investment, other than, I convinced my wife to marry, but our best investment was when my wife was, she worked for a company called TimeNet. So she put a bunch of money into her 401k, and TimeNet got bought out by McDonnell Douglas. And so for that 3-month period, she got like a, 80% return. So if you annualize that, her returns have been much better than mine have. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you questions. So for example, what is your age? Most of you are either 4 or 5. What you're going to do is you're going to put that number out, and then we're going to add up each of those points on the number there. So question, what's the relationship between age and risk? Yeah, the younger you are, the more risk you're willing to take. So what you're going to do, like I said, most of you are 4 or 5, so you're going to write problem 1, you got 5 points on it. Problem 2, investment time horizon for this money. If you've got a longer time horizon, you're willing to take more or less risk. I take more risk. So the shorter the time horizon, less risk, like Oren's question there about the down payment money. Andres.
We're looking at different investments, like we're looking at investing for retirement or investing for kids' college tuition, and they definitely have different investment horizons. We're looking at different risks.
Right, we are. Of course, what should your overall portfolio be? It should be consistent with your level of risk. So I have 529 money for my kids' education and education IRAs. I have retirement money. I got money set aside just for different things like a car, the next car we have, things like that. But my overall asset allocation is consistent with my overall level of risk, even though there's individual buckets there that have different time horizons. Okay, what's the relationship? What's your primary objective for this money? So does that have an impact on your willingness to accept risk? So preservation of principal just means you don't want to lose money. This is money you're going to put for the down payment on your house. Next one is current income. You'd like to have a little bit of income coming in. Maybe this is retirement money. Or growth in income. You want a little bit of money coming in, but you'd like that amount to grow. Then conservative growth, you'd like it to grow, but you'd like it conservative. And aggressive growth means you want much higher returns. So what's the impact? What's your primary objective for this money? Here's another interesting, personal earnings. What does personal earnings, how does that impact your willingness to take risk? If you think your earnings are going to grow by 50% next year, are you going to willing to take more risk or less risk? More. So hopefully most of your earnings are going to increase by significantly more. How about your emergency fund? How does your emergency fund impact your willingness to take risk? I know some people who have no emergency fund and they put their money in the stock market. And anytime the stock market hiccups 1%, they get nervous and things like this. So actually, and this doesn't include borrowings or credit lines, but it does include money in checking accounts, savings, CDs, things like that. Take the number there. So we have 8 questions. How about your investment experience? Does that impact your willingness to take risk? So the question here is, I've never invested any money in a financial market or instrument, or all the way down to 5. Invested money for years and have a definite knowledge of how stock and bond financial markets work. If you're married, is it important that both of you learn to this and both of you improve your abilities? A mistake, if I could do my life over in one area, I put money aside for my kids, for their educations and missions. I wish I would have sat down with them individually and started teaching them about the stock market then. So that's a mistake that I've made that I wish I could go back. And it's harder now that they're older and some of them are graduated and things like this. Okay, how about investment risk? Based on your view of risk, which investment would you be more comfortable making? Savings account, CDs, other short-term, or pick new and emerging growth companies and aggressive growth stock mutual funds? And the last question is investment preference. Let's take all of these numbers and subtract 2% from them, just because for right now. So I did this about 8 years ago when the numbers were higher. Would you be more likely to invest? 20-year return, again, 4% minus 2. You make 2%, never experience negative returns. Number 2, 20-year average return of 4%, periods, but less than a year when you had negative returns. Or 3, 6%, few moderate downturns, or 8%, several periods of above average returns and several periods of below average returns. So which of those would you be more comfortable making? Okay. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to add up your points from each of those. So if the question had the 4 by it, you'd add up your points here. So I want to do so I want to add up those total points. Okay, first of all, I'd like you, before we use the results of this, I'd like to tell me how many people think that you are a very conservative investor. How would you use that? Would you use that label for you? Raise your hand. 1, 2. How about conservative investors? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. How about moderate investors? Aggressive? Glad to see some of you vote early and vote often and very aggressive. Okay. So what's the problem? If you're a conservative investor, what's the problem over time by being very conservative? You have less risk, but what's the risk on the other side? Lower returns, and so you basically have to invest more. How about very aggressive investors? More risk, but what happens? Especially if you lose money, much higher volatility. So ideally what we want to do is we want to invest at a risk tolerance level that we're comfortable with. Okay, so let's talk about how this works. So if you got 8 to 12 points, you would be a very conservative investor. And did we have any very conservative investors here? Okay, so this is before. Okay. So, there's a number of rules of thumb. And generally the rules of thumb are different because we all have different rules of thumb, have different sized thumbs. But there's a rule of thumb that's been in the financial services and generally, which is your age in bonds. So Mitch, I'm guessing he's 20, let's say 25, just to make the math easy. So he's probably 22. But Mitch is 22. I'm 62, and I'm going to say 65 just to make the math easier. So I should have my age in bonds, which is 65% in bonds. Maybe let's say 60% in bonds. So make me, and Mitch would have 25% in bonds. What's the logic behind that?
You have a longer time horizon, you're willing to take on more risk.
So Mitch is much more willing to take on more risk because he's 25. Let's say we both live to be 100. So he's got 75 years to make that up, and I only have 40 years there. Does that logic seem to fit? Okay, but here's another question. Let's say there's someone else who's 60. They still have 3 kids in the home, and I don't have any kids in the home, and things like that. Are there differences in risk tolerance, or are there other differences? I've had a lot of experience in the stock market. This person hasn't had any experience. So generally what we like to do is we like to take that statement, your age in bonds, and we make an adjustment. So if you're very conservative, notice what it does here. It subtracts 20% from bonds, and it adds 20% to bonds and cash. And I put bonds and cash together. So if I was conservative, very conservative, I'm 60% in bonds, then what would I be in bonds? Bonds and cash. I'd be 80% in bonds and only 20%. Now, if Mitch was very conservative, he's 25, what would he be in equities and what would he be in bonds and cash? So it'd be 25%, and then he'd add 20% in bonds. So he'd be at 45% bonds and 55% equities. So do we understand that framework? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Conservative, anywhere from 13 to 20 points. Anyone here was conservative? Boy, I'm surprised. Of course, you're all young. So that makes it. And again, if you're conservative, what you'd do is you would add 10% to bonds and subtract 10% from bonds and cash. How about moderate, 21 to 28? Okay. So you guys are the easiest one because it's your age in bonds. And and I've actually seen some financial planners trying to change that number, but it's a pretty good number. How about aggressive? Anyone here aggressive, which is 29 to 36? And anyone very aggressive, which is beyond 36? Okay. So our point here is, now what we've done is we've taken this risk tolerance test, and now you know what kind of an investor you are. So now you tell me what kind of an investor you are. If you're moderate, and I look at your age, and I actually know, I should know what your asset allocation is pretty close. Oren.
So just when I look at this, I guess I'm confused still.
Okay.
So I throw in the moderate.
I'm 25.
So you're 25% bonds and cash and 75% equities.
Okay, so you just add whatever to the one that's increasing your
Right.
plus your age.
Yeah.
And the rest is just the other thing.
And your age in bonds.
Okay.
So the nice thing about this, now this gives us a rough idea on what your asset allocation is. So the fact that most of you are moderate, it's just your age in bonds. But do you understand the logic behind it? Most of you are, let's say, most of you are 20, 25. So you've got 3/4 would be in equities. But is that the asset class that would give the highest return over the longer period of time? And the answer is yes. Okay, let's continue on. Again, stay diversified. Again, that's your biggest defense against risk. We'll work that here. Low cost and tax efficiently. It's just so important. Remember, if you can save $1 from fees and expenses, that's one more dollar. It's one more dollar that you have to spend on your goals. And so you need to be really wise. Realize funds spend things differently. So this is Magellan Fund. This is from 2004. But notice there's different fees. This is your expense ratio that they report. That yellow is brokerage commissions, and the orange is kind of estimated trading. Now, if you buy an index fund, I buy my Vanguard index fund here. I'm paying what? 17 basis points, 0.17%. How much turnover does an index fund do? The only time they turn over is when they change the index. So you choose the fees that you pay. You also choose the taxes you pay. You choose the taxes you pay by the investments that you buy. You buy a load fund, you're paying 5.5% up front. You buy an index fund, no cost, no load. The only thing you're paying is your management fee. Invest long term. Really, there's no get-rich-quick schemes that work. I'm amazed at the number of people that think that there's this way to get rich quick in the market. There's people who know all the ins and outs. And if you pay them enough money, they will teach you how to do it. That's crazy. I had a cousin who came to me, and he wrote this program, and he charged people $500 for it. And I think I told you about that. He came to me and he said, Bryan, he said, what can I do to make it work? And I said, good luck. So be aware. If it's really a good thing, what'll they do? They'll use it, make $1 million, and go buy an island in the Bahamas. If it's not good, they'll try to sell it to someone else. So be aware. Interesting, trading is hazardous to your wealth. What these guys did is they looked at gross return, net return, and turnover. And generally, what you want to do is look at this net return. Notice the more turnover you make, the lower your returns. And does this net return take into account taxes? The answer is no. So be wise and invest long term. If you want to invest in individual assets, know what you're doing. How easy is it to invest in individual assets? Travis, you're just starting the large cap project. How easy is it to understand the companies?
It's difficult to understand the companies, but it's easy to buy the stocks.
Yeah, it's easy to buy the stocks. It's difficult. So this is the work we do in the modeling and valuation class. One company is about 14 pages. So you're welcome to take a look and kind of see the stuff that we do. Monitor performance. President Monson says, where performance is measured, performance improves. Where performance is measured and reported, the rate of improvement accelerates. What was he talking about? Yeah, probably either that or home teaching, one of those. But the point is, it's the same way. I used to you report to my wife the performance of my funds, and finally I thought, you know what, teaching this, we really should do it. And that was actually before we started teaching, but I reported. She looked at it, and she looked at the benchmarks. She says, you know what, you're underperforming the benchmarks. I had a bunch of actively managed funds. Finally, she says, why don't we just go buy index funds for that? I also had a problem. I had a 6-month-old who had to pay taxes because the funds that I bought into her account were actively managed, and they distributed a whole bunch of dividends. And so she says, let's get out of it. So we sold all the actively managed fund and bought index funds, and we've never haven't had that problem since. 8, don't waste too much time, energy trying to beat the market unless you have lots of time, energy, and money. Develop a sleep well portfolio. It's just much more fun. High quality, licensed, and reputable people and institutions. Hopefully I'm one of those people there. I do have my CFA, so I do have some things here. But whoever you do, make sure you compare your performance after fees and taxes and compare those against the benchmarks. That's really the important thing. But you use the best resources available. Know how they're compensated. And then 10, good investment plan, goals, budget, and these principles, and follow it closely. So again, if you go back to what the Charles Schwab things, we're covering each of those things here. Again, if you do what everyone else does, you'll get what everyone else gets. And we can't expect to do better than everyone else if we're doing what everyone else does. Oren?
So my question is, we showed the statistics
About investor returns versus index.
Uh-huh.
How do we make sure we end up in the right, we don't end up in the lower quality investor returns
Okay.
versus the index returns? Because I feel like if I go to Northwestern Mutual or Fidelity or something like
What
that.
happens when you go to an insurance company for returns?
You don't get me.
So an insurance company is just think about insurance products, high fees, very complex, and a lot of those fees are due to the complexity of the products. So insurance companies were never meant to develop to return the high fees.
So what
And like I said, investments were never ever meant to be your insurance. No. So use investments for what it does well and insurance for what it does well. Tanner.
Do you like annuities at all? Like anywhere in here?
When we get to the point where we'll be talking about our retirement plan, so I think that annuities are a good idea when you get closer to retirement because that ensures that money will stay there for long. Do I think you need to buy an annuity now when when interest rates are likely to change significantly? I think we need to use wisdom in what we do, and again, understanding the products for what they do well. Here's a quick question. Why review asset class performance? So asset classes are groups of stocks that perform similarly. Why do we want to review it? What's the comment? Those who fail to learn the lessons of history are what? Destined to repeat it. Does that work for asset classes as well? So here's data off 1925 to 2015. Like I said, I'll try to have the updated graphs within the next couple weeks. So remember 1987? That really looks such a big dip here. But in the long term, and this is a log scale. So overall, has the market done well? Yeah. Average return. So here's a question. 1 year annual returns, that's real volatile, isn't it? Why would anyone ever want to invest in that? Because remember, what happens though if you take a 5-year view? Does that look a little bit less volatile? What happens when you take a 10-year view? Okay. So again, as we take a longer view, it seems to be a lot more useful. Here's actually returns and risks through 2015. Large cap, small cap, treasury bonds, treasury bills. Here's international, emerging markets, REITs, and inflation. What do you notice generally over long periods of time? Have the returns been well? Yeah. So, and realize this is a large cap is a portfolio of 500 stocks. It's not an individual stock. I'm amazed at these people who say, well, I looked at the stock market, I invested 2 stocks, and I lost my money in both stocks. It's a fool's playground. You just got to understand. And again, you need to follow the principles. Okay, let's do a couple of problems. Oh, sorry. Oren.
So where would so if I want to start investing in the stock market or just investing, where do I go?
How about you wait for 4 days
Yeah.
until when we talk about how to select financial assets? You're jumping ahead of me.
Okay.
Okay, what other questions did I ask you to ask so I could look like I was organized here? Okay, here's a case study. He's 35 years old, took the risk tolerance test. He determined he was moderate. Based on the rule of thumb, his age in bonds and the results from the risk tolerance test, which most likely represents Ryan's preferred asset allocation. Realize his emergency fund is included in his bonds and cash allocation. So which of those allocations would be his preferred asset allocation? Let's talk about A. Is that it? Why not? Jalen, why not? Too much in cash and bonds. So he's got 60% in cash and bonds. How about B? B? No, why?
No bonds.
Not enough in cash and bonds. How about C? Yeah. Okay. And so the point here is each of you are going to have to come up with your asset allocations. D is too little exposure. How about this one? Now he's aggressive. How about which is A? No. Why not? Too much cash. How about B?
Yeah.
Would B? Yeah. Okay. How about C? Well, in fact, why don't you tell me? A is what type of an investor? So it would be moderate. Wait a second. No, you'd be very conservative. That's right. B? Aggressive. C? Moderate. And D? Very aggressive. So, but do you see? All I have to do is look at what type of an investor you are and your age, and I can understand what type of where you should be investing. Now, here's a question: will this change depending on your circumstances? Let's say I have a defined benefit plan for my work, where they guarantee a certain amount of money coming in every year for the rest of my life. Could that take advantage of? Could that be a part of my portfolio? So in something like that, what would that take? What would that take the place of? Would it take the place of my equities, or would it take the place of my bonds? Yeah, the bonds. Let's see if I have one more. Okay. So questions. So what we wanted today to talk about was how should we be investing? And again, let me bring in what Warren Buffett said. He says, Mr. Buffett himself recommended that investors use low-cost index funds. So what's a low-cost index fund? Why does he like index funds? Low fees. So low fees, low cost. Are they also tax efficient? Very much tax efficient. Rather than placing their money with active managers that charge higher fees, more than $100 billion, he said. And then here's the thing. Let's see. He also said this. Someone wrote about what he's saying. He's saying that what he's saying is that the average investor is not going to do better than average, which is okay. Okay, takeaways. Takeaways from today. Travis.
It's important to have a set of rules that you'll follow in investing so you don't break those rules.
Important to have a set of rules that you follow and you don't break those rules. That's your investment plan. And it's like that. Schwab said that people who planned had 3 times more net worth at retirement than those who did. Shelby.
I think we spend a lot more time upfront planning our investments than we do in the process of having them. That way we can spend our time on the important things in our lives.
So spend the upfront time planning your investments. So when the time comes when you're doing your investments, you can spend time on the really important things, like spending time with your spouse and your kids and your church and things like that. Andres.
The amount of money that you allocate to investments is not the first priority on all of these things. Paying your family, paying bills.
The amount of money you allocate is not the most important thing. It should be putting the Lord first and your family first and being a personal responsibility. So putting this at risk.
It reminds me of what the Millionaire Next Door says. And I don't remember exactly if this is right, but he says if the average American were to spend the same amount of time that they watch TV planning their investment portfolios, all of them would see much higher returns on their investments.
In fact, so we need to spend the time. If we spent as much time watching TV as we did planning our investments, we would have much better portfolios. Any others? So here's my key takeaways from today. Number 1, the challenge is to teach correct principles. Then each of you have to use those principles to govern your circumstances. Number 2, if you do what everyone else does, you will get what everyone else gets. And as we can see from the graphs, most people have gotten poor performance. And number 3, remember that money doesn't change us. All it does is it reveals us to ourselves, because we're all worth the same when we turn off the light. Thanks, everyone. We will see you on Monday.